Going to admit the one member that is in the Zoom room. I believe it's the press. I will hit record. You'll hear the robot speak, and then you may begin. So just give me 1 minute to do that.
Progress.
Yes, of course, yes.
Are we on? Good evening. I want to welcome everyone here to the Wednesday, October 25th, 2023 meeting, the regular meeting of the Palm Springs Planning Commission. Can I have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Baker,
Here.
Commissioner Miller,
Here.
Commissioner Murphy,
Present.
Commissioner Roberts, Commissioner Rotman,
Here.
and Chair Wermick.
Present. Can I have a report on the posting of the agenda, please?
Yes, Madam Chair, the agenda was available for public access on the exterior bulletin board of City Hall by 9 p.m. on Thursday, October 19th, and it was posted on the city's website in accordance with city and state rules.
Thank you. At this point, we are at the acceptance of the agenda. Can I have a motion to accept the agenda?
So moved.
Is there a
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Abstain.
Oh, you can still accept the agenda. So is that a yes?
Yes.
Thank you.
It's not the minutes.
At this point, it's public comments. This time has been set aside for members of the public to address the Planning Commission on the consent calendar and other agenda items and items of general interest within the subject matter jurisdiction of the Commission. Please note that we're prohibited from taking action on items not listed on the posted agenda. Each speaker will be allowed 3 minutes. Members of the public who would like to comment on item 1A, which is the consent calendar, may do so at this time. And people who would like to comment on 2A, which is the public hearing item, can do so at this time or when the matter is before the commission. Are there any members of the public who wish to address us?
Madam Chair, no one has signed up in the audience. You're here for item 2A, correct? And there is one person in the Zoom. If you would like to speak on the consent calendar, items 1A or 1B, please raise your hand and indicate that you'd like to speak. Madam Chair, there are no speakers. Madam Chair, if I could just make a request that you move your microphone up a little bit. The audio isn't getting captured.
Oh, sorry about that. Okay, the public comments are closed. We're now at the consent calendar. And there are 2 items on the consent calendar. Item 1A, approval of the minutes of October 11th, 2023. And should I take these separately, correct? I should take these items separately?
Yes, no. If there are no changes to the agenda or if no one wants to pull an item, you can vote on them in batch. If someone wants to pull one of the consent items for discussion, you can do that now.
Okay,
with the
and
motion.
item 1B, City of Palm Springs request for a general plan conformity finding for vacation of a portion of a public right-of-way shown as Lot D and Lot C in the Crosley Tract MB 32-44, Section 29, Township 4, Range 4 East. Are there any comments on these, or can I have a motion?
I did have a comment on one, a question that was answered by staff, so I can make a motion to approve the consent agenda if you're ready.
I'm
I'll
ready.
move to approve the consent agenda.
I'll second.
Can you call the roll, please?
Yes.
Commissioner Miller,
Yes.
Commissioner Murphy,
Yes.
Commissioner Roberts is excused, Commissioner Rotman,
Yes.
and Chair Wermick.
Yes. Thank you. The second item is a public hearing item. It is item 2A, an application by Candiance, am I pronouncing? Cadence Group LLC, comprised of a development permit, a variance, and a conditional use permit for a proposed drive-through coffee shop on a .46 acre parcel located at 2466 North Palm Canyon Drive. Staff report, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioners. May I have the PowerPoint brought up, please? Oh, it is up there. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm not seeing it on my screen. There you go. Thank you. So this is a proposed drive-through coffee shop at the corner of North Palm Canyon Drive and Racket Club Road. The parcel is part of what had been a shopping center back in the 1980s and was demolished almost entirely in the early 2000s, with the exception of the fast food restaurant that's adjacent to this particular parcel, the Del Taco. The parcel and the whole entire shopping center has remained vacant since that time. The particular project before you is a drive-through only coffee shop, which is currently anticipated to be branded as a Starbucks. The items that you're going to be considering in this particular application today is the development permit, the variance, and the conditional use permit. The conditional use permit is required for a drive-through type of use. The variance finding is necessary because in the C1 zone, which is what was underlying here, the minimum square footage for buildings is 2,000 square feet, and the proposed building is about 1,150 square feet. And so in order to make the finding that this project conforms to development standards, the variance is necessary. The development permit, of course, is to analyze and evaluate the overall site plan, massing, building placement, and so on for the project. So in looking through the staff report, as I mentioned, it is about a half an acre site. The project site, although it's zoned as a planned development district, this PD is left over from when this was a shopping center. When that PD was issued back in the 80s, they did not bring in specific uses. It was simply a neighborhood shopping center. And so the uses were the same as those in the underlying C1 zone. So we've analyzed this in terms of the permitted uses as though it were a C1 parcel, even though the zoning designation is PD. The project, because it's a drive-through only, in terms of the off-street parking requirements, there really is no parking requirement because parking for restaurants is based on the number of seats or the square footage where the public is served. But in this case, the applicant, Starbucks, does want to have an off-street parking lot in order for their staff to park. There's 7 spaces, not 8. That is an error in my staff report. So there are 7 parking spaces that are proposed on the parcel, and those are for the staff. The reason there's 7 is because they have 3 or 4 per shift. They want to have enough for the previous shift to have parking and then the next one to come in. The parcel is a little bit constrained, both in terms of its the length and width of the parcel and the rather odd configuration of it. It also is unique in the sense that this parcel, because it's very close to the corner, does not have its own separate driveways and curb cuts onto Palm Canyon or Racket Club. So the parcel takes its vehicular access through reciprocal access agreements with the adjacent parcels. There's an existing curb cut on Palm Canyon, and there's an existing curb cut on Racket Club just east of the Del Taco. And those are the vehicular access points into the entire complex of sites and parcels, but specifically also for this use. The city's parking code, which identifies the number of queuing spaces you need for a drive-through, requires 7. And in this case, the applicant is proposing 19. As you'll see in the site plan, it starts off as a dual lane queuing lane, which merges into one before it gets to the order machine, and then ultimately to the pickup or delivery window. Sorry? Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, I gotta keep doing this thing. I get going with talking. So here is an image of the site, and the two white arrows you see are the vehicular access points for the shopping center and this particular parcel. Here is an understanding, just to kind of put this in context. This is what the original shopping center had been. You see how this site was an integral part of that originally. This was identified in the early 1980s as a pad site or a future pad site, but nothing was ever built on it. It's the same with the way the Del Taco was established. So the proposal is as a drive-through coffee shop. As I mentioned, no walk-up, takeout, or dine-in service. It's an 1,150 square foot building, 19 vehicle queuing lane, and there's extensive landscaping, an extensive landscape buffer with many shade trees. And I want to talk about that a minute. This parcel, because of the way it's oriented, in order to bring the takeout window or the delivery window onto the right side of the vehicle, is oriented where the back of the building is basically facing the corner. And so I've worked with the applicant to really look at this site as really the first landscaped corner or the first landscape site that you're going to see as you're entering 111. It's not an easy site to develop in this regard because what you're trying to do, if you were to orient it towards the street, there's just no way of bringing it in with the queuing lanes. So the way we looked at it at staff level is to landscape this as much as possible, make this a very verdant corner with the trees and the shade, and really use it to kind of mask the building itself. The findings for this project begin on page 8 of your staff report for the development permit. And I want to just speak a minute as I was talking about this landscape plan. You see here the number of trees and the plantings that have been proposed here are quite extensive. The southern end of this pie-shaped parcel is where the stormwater retention basin is, and that is really about the only natural open space on the parcel besides the corner, and it's also heavily planted. So we're looking at it as kind of a very, like I say, kind of a green area. This particular area, when you go on to the city's general plan, and I'm going to jump ahead a minute in the staff report to page 11, this is considered a primary node. And what that means is it's a part of the city in the general plan as you're looking at the various areas along Palm Canyon, that it's a gathering place. It's a place where you have a natural condition here where it's not simply a line of buildings as you see further south, where there's really an edge to the development. This corner really functions as kind of a primary node, and that's how it's identified in the city's general plan. So the details on this that are unique. The applicant is requesting relief from the requirement of the zoning code to have shade structures at the drive-up machine and at the pickup window. Instead of those shade structures, we have encouraged them to use shade trees to provide the shade at those areas. There also are shade trees in the queuing lanes as well. As I mentioned earlier, the parking spaces on the parcel are for the employees of this particular business. There are on the site right now some remnant parking spaces that were left over from when the entire shopping center was intact. The parking lot and the reciprocal access agreements for parking, as you see with most large parking or neighborhood community shopping centers, is a shared parking kind of situation. So although you're seeing these parking spaces on this particular site, I'll distinguish the existing parking spaces, they are not a required set of parking spaces for the Del Taco. The Del Taco has parking on its own site that satisfies its requirements, and there's also parking across the rest of the sites that provide the necessary parking for the uses on that site, as well as whatever will be eventually developed on the rest of the project site. And then lastly, there was a correction in the conditions of approval. Fire department condition number 2 mentions fire sprinklers being required, and they are not required in this particular case. The rest of the findings in terms of the variance and the conditional use permit begin on page 10 of your staff report. and the variance findings begin on page 13. And we have noted in the staff report that we believe that the affirmative findings can be made in support of all three applications that are associated with this project. So this is what I just got done basically saying, and our recommendation for you is approval of this project subject to the conditions of approval, and a recommendation to the Architectural Review Committee to approve the major architectural. This, again, is just a view of the building looking northbound. This is looking northbound on Palm Canyon. So as you're looking toward the left of this particular image, that's 111 going north. I think that concludes my presentation. The applicant's representative is in the audience and is prepared to also provide a small PowerPoint presentation for you, and I'm available to answer any questions. Thank you.
I looked at the site today, and I think it's going to be a nice improvement to that area. I wondered about the traffic flow as the cars are coming through to exit from the pickup window. How close would the exiting traffic be to the entrance, the North Palm Canyon entrance? It looked pretty tight, so I was just curious about traffic flow.
Let me go back and I'll show you how that lays out. Oops, sorry. So here you see on this site, and does this thing do the same pointing still that it used to? That's the only one I have in the slide presentation. In your packet, if you look at the 3 pages up from the, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pages up from the back, you'll see the landscape plan in greater clarity. To answer your question, the driveway curb cuts onto Palm Canyon are south of where this queuing lane discharges out onto the adjacent parcel. So when you look at the north-south access easement that's basically on the Del Taco parcel, they're pulling out there and there's still room for 3 or 4 cars to queue before they come out onto Palm Canyon Drive. Both of these driveway curb cuts, I think, if I'm not mistaken, allow both left and right egress out of the project site. So we believe it does have adequate space. Once you've paid, picked up your coffee, and you're heading out, there is room there for vehicles to still queue up as they're heading onto the public street.
Okay, thank you.
It's a very highly trafficked street, and to try and make a left-hand turn there seems to be pretty dangerous.
Well, there are center.
There are. I'm just saying because of, just people are zooming by there
Yeah.
trying to make that light. I mean, I drive through there almost every day, and it's
Yeah, and it's part of Caltrans Highway 111. And so part of the reality of redevelopment of this entire project site, both this particular parcel and the rest of this shopping center, is Caltrans is very, very resistant in terms of putting in additional curb cuts. So it's likely that this, as the rest of these sites eventually develop with some type of commercial use, this may be the only curb cut onto 111 that we'll see there. It's a busy section of the street, and it's certainly running at a pretty high speed compared to further south. But it has functioned that way when the shopping center was there. So I don't have hesitation in saying that, yes, it is a challenging driveway curb cut to make a left hand out. But because there is a center lane there, you
Yeah.
can at least pull out to the center and then merge into the southbound traffic.
And I would just add, this, as part of our review process, we do coordinate with the city's engineering department, so they looked at this as well. They provide a list of conditions which are
Yeah,
included
I
in the
saw
conditions of
those, yeah.
approval, and they didn't flag any concerns about this in terms of their standards of service.
And then one other thing I've noticed from going to that Del Taco coming off of Racket Club is you have to drive through that parking lot, which has remnants of concrete barriers that you cannot see at night. I mean, I've run like, what did I just hit? They're small I mean, that parking lot's just been neglected. There's very poor lighting, so people coming in by Del Taco trying to get into that queue, it's not as straightforward as it appears on this diagram.
It's a deteriorated existing parking lot. I'll make a note of that, and that's something we can take up in terms of code enforcement with that property owner. So it's a good point.
I did have a question as we were going through this. Regarding the shade structures that would otherwise be required at the order box and the pickup window, those, providing alleviation of those doesn't rise to the level of a variance though, right?
No,
It's just is it a recommended accoutrement in the code, or how is that presented as a requirement?
in the zoning code where it talks about drive-throughs, it talks about there being shade structure at the order machine and at the pickup window.
Okay.
So we've talked with them about that. At the pickup window, it does have about a 4-foot 9-inch overhang or projection off the roof, which provides some amount of shade or cover. It doesn't fully shade the vehicle while they're sitting there making payment.
Yeah.
Which is why I've tried to encourage them to bring the trees in instead of the shade structure.
And it provides, I think, relief from any rain that we might get, but because that window faces south, for most of the year, that's going to be beating sun coming in from that south direction. So just a heads up to the applicant, I'm going to ask you the question why you wanted to forego the shade structures, especially the pickup window.
Yeah, this is more in general terms. As we review this for the CUP, how much of this is discretionary? How much of it is, I mean, how do we base findings? If we're for or against the project, how do we base our findings? Is there some discretion in, I don't know if I'm asking my question clearly enough, but do you kind of know what I'm asking? Okay,
I know
thank you.
what you're asking. Well, a CUP is a discretionary action. And so the findings are there. If you feel that the findings that staff has proposed are satisfactory to you, then you could approve the project. If you feel that the staff findings on the CUP or the other two parts of the application do not support what you feel is appropriate here, then you can make alternative findings stating that it does not conform to the findings. But in both the variance and the CUP, all four findings must be made affirmatively in order for you to approve the project.
Okay.
And conversely, if you were to go the other direction, it would need to be based in the findings that are presented in here.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, one last question on the, coming over from sustainability, we have a problem with drive-in windows, period. Is there, I don't know, in the general plan, is there looking towards a future of reducing traffic? And, I mean, this just flies in the face of everything sustainability is trying not to do. Having idling cars sit in the sun while you get a cup of coffee. There's no, but is there anything in the general plan looking towards that aspect of vehicular traffic and drive-through windows?
Well, I know a little bit more about the 2007 general plan because I worked on it than I do on the one that's coming up for you guys to consider the revisions on. I know that in the current general plan, there are various goals, policies, and action items relating to sustainability. I'm not aware of any that says something to the effect of reduce the number of drive-throughs. In all the things that are related to sustainability that's in the current general plan, however, they're talking about all of those kinds of things: vehicle emissions, vehicle trips, walkability, all those kinds of factors. So we still have a zoning code that allows there to be drive-through uses, but as they say, they are discretionary, and which is why they're coming under a conditional use permit rather than as a by right use.
Thank you.
Your mic. Your mic.
Is off?
There you go.
Okay. Does the variance require city council approval?
No, it does not.
Okay. I'm going to start with the site plan, and I'm going to ask why, because as you drive into this, you have to drive from either curb cut the longest distance to the entrance to the drive-through. And the site plan, I have a difficulty with the site plan from the orientation and the lack of any orientation of the building on the street. So I'd want to ask if you looked at a different site plan where the entrance came sooner, where you have the building and it went around, because you've got the longest drive to the entrance from the Del Taco. You've got to go around an entire three sides of a building, or coming off of Palm Canyon, you have to drive past the building and go there. So in terms of the orientation, was staff working on that with the applicant?
When this application first hit my desk and we began analyzing it, we talked about the fact that this is a corner that is one of the most prominent corners on the north side of the city, and the building, unfortunately, is oriented with its back to the corner. We did not insist on them reconfiguring the site plan. We recognize that as you come around to the pickup window, you're going to have the pickup window, of course, on the left side of the car. To push the building further north might be possible. The way that you would enter it then would be, I think, rather than this very large loop that brings you around, once you push the building further north toward the Racket Club Road frontage, that ability to accommodate all the queuing becomes smaller or less. Now, they only are required to do 7. They've provided 19, I think, recognizing that's going to be a pretty heavily used drive-through.
Is there?
So, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No, so that was what we had discussed, but they were looking at it in terms of how to maximize the amount of queuing, and this was the site plan that achieved that for them.
And from a sustainability point of view, what is the advantage of, I think it's 19 queuing spaces versus 7 in terms of motors running and car exhaust?
From a sustainability perspective?
Yes.
I suspect there is none.
Thank you.
I think what they're really looking at was the fact that they anticipate a higher volume than what our code even requires.
Okay, I've got more questions, and they are on basically in terms of a urban and pedestrian feel. I mean, this site is called a primary node of the city, and some of the standards talk about pedestrian, but what we have here is something that involves no pedestrians and provides no pedestrian presence on the street in a primary node area, which is the entrance to the city. I'm assuming we have discretion on that, but did staff look at this from a urbanist perspective? Do we have any urbanist standards in the city?
We don't have urban standards per se. We did look at this and had the conversations with them that this is completely a vehicular-oriented use. We worked with the applicant to make sure that the shade trees that they were putting on the site also shaded the the perimeter sidewalks so that any walkable activity that's happening on this particular part of the, at this particular node are at least provided with shade. But when you really look at this use, it doesn't have a pedestrian component to it. And that's really, I guess, the nature of what this particular applicant is proposing.
And that sort of is my next question, which is, I walked around and looked at every restaurant in that area, including the fast food and the 7-Eleven, and all of them have a pedestrian component. They have a way for the public to enter the building and make an order, either drive a car up or walk up. And I want to understand staff's perspective in bringing something to us that had no pedestrian component and was merely a drive-through.
I think it goes back to the findings that we were discussing earlier, and I think our evaluation of this was, again, we flagged the issues with the applicant. We worked with them to bring a plan to you that we felt achieved, the issues that you're raising tonight. This is their proposal. I think for us, looking at the node and looking at the surrounding uses, this is not a heavily pedestrianized corridor. There aren't a lot of pedestrian activities in this area, so we were looking at that as part of the context. And so once we knew, what their perspective was, what their position was, and what they were looking for as a private applicant, we then worked with them on the landscaping and other design elements to at least enhance the pedestrian experience along Racket Club and Palm Canyon as best we could, so that you may not be walking to this Starbucks, but as you are walking by on either one of these frontages, you have enhanced landscaping and other features that will at least make that experience better than if you were walking past what had been there before, or frankly, what is across the street as more of a strip mall experience.
Across the street, there is a building frontage. Across 111 or Palm Canyon, there's a frontage of at least two buildings that create
On
an
the
urban...
west side.
On the west side, create an urban frontage, and down the street, there's a newly redone, rehabilitated hotel with, I think, a newly rehabilitated restaurant that's exceedingly popular. So it looks like development is moving down that street in terms of looking at it. So when we looked at the frontage, you were only looking at the north and not at the west in terms of what of comparing frontages?
Again, this is a private application, so we're responding to what a private applicant has provided to us. So in our assessment, it meets the findings. That's not one of the findings that's in here. You all are free to make a different finding, but our evaluation was based on some of the surrounding context and the lack of pedestrian activity that exists there today, that, we felt that this was ready to advance for your consideration.
And I will ask the applicant, but did you ask the applicant why there was absolutely no pedestrian access to the coffee shop?
Well, I can explain to you that when this first came in, there was a small component of outdoor seating, and there was a walk-up takeout window. At some point during the time that we were analyzing this, Starbucks, which is, of course, this will become a corporate Starbucks, is the best of my knowledge, determined that they did not want to have a walk-up facility, and that takeout or walk-up and takeout window was taken out, and the outdoor seating was taken out, and it became a vehicular access only. The questions that you're raising are valid in terms of the urban design of it. The ability to make this particular use become more of an urban edge building, we struggled with as well. And what we felt at this point was, given the very, very small footprint of this building, as well as the way that the site was being arranged, the best way of addressing this particular use on this particular corner was to soften the corner. And rather than letting it be a continuation of that urban edge, it becomes a relief or a verdant node in that otherwise urban edge. So you reach this point and it opens up rather than the urban edge being continued around this corner. It was really what we thought was the best way of looking at it in terms of an urban design question or challenge.
Thank you.
You also, just to add, one of the considerations is, of course, the constraints of the site. So I think if you were to have a more intensive use here, you would generate more parking potentially, and the site becomes more constrained. So I think there is a consideration to what can viably go here that we thought about a little bit, and I'm certainly not suggesting that there's nothing else that's viable here, but just that was part of the consideration as well.
That's a second question. There's a large parking lot there, and I'm assuming some of it is shared in terms of reciprocal easements between the parcels?
I have not looked in great detail, Commissioner Wermuck, on that, but I do know that they have reciprocal access agreements, and that when this was a fully functioning neighborhood shopping center, the parking lots that are there were shared.
And the parking that they're taking out were on the east side, and there was a row of parking there across from the Del Taco. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So it's those that have been taken out and replaced with the interior parking.
That's correct. If you go back to the original drawings, the 1980s drawings for that shopping center, this was identified as a pad parcel. My assumption was that they were looking for probably a similar kind of small building footprint, and that those parking spaces that were aligned along that eastern edge of this property were probably the ones that would be most likely to have been used had that pad building ever been built.
Thank you so much. Are there any other questions before I open the public hearing? Yes.
I'd just like a clarification that all of the shade trees are a requirement, not a request?
No, most of the shade trees on this particular project are a request. They're required to provide shading at the parking area. And with a lot that's this small, they're only required to have 30% of their parking spaces that are shaded. We urged the applicant to put as many shade trees around the perimeter of the parcel as possible, both because of the urban heat island effect, the ability to make this part of the city more walkable by having shade on those perimeter sidewalks, and also, as I mentioned earlier, to really buffer and screen and create this corner as a greener looking corner rather than a commercial building corner.
However, I think to get to the core of why you may have been asking the question, the landscape plan that is ultimately approved, if this advances and is approved by the ARC, who will look at the landscape plan, they would be required to build it per the landscape plan. So they have, in response to what Ken is saying, agreed to put these shading trees in. They would be bound by the landscape plan that gets approved, if that makes sense.
But not by the Planning Commission, by the Architectural Review Commission? Is that what you're saying?
If you feel that there should be something different in terms of the landscape plan, you could certainly request the ARC to look at it with your concerns in mind. If you feel, I'll just use as an example, the Planning Commission thinks there should be more trees. We would like the ARC to look at this landscape plan with the idea of putting in more trees, or whatever it is that might be your concern. You can certainly, as you forward this to the ARC, you can forward it with a request that they look at a particular detail or colors or materials and so on.
And I believe the commission in the past has even gone so far as include conditions of approval to that effect.
We've done that. It's within our purview to send that along in that fashion. Okay. And we're clearly looking at discretionary items here, so that it's something that can come. I do have one more question, and it's the double Q. And looking at I think it's a Del Taco across the street, although I'm not sure.
Next door.
Next door. Is it going to have the same look in terms of the drive, where there's a screening wall and then a sunken?
Similar.
And how sunken is it? The staff report doesn't say.
The ordinance requires that drive-through lanes be screened from the public surrounding public streets. The screening needs to be 4 feet in height from the driveway surface. This particular parcel, the topography of it raises slightly as you get toward the corner. So by the time you're out at that northwesterly corner of this site, you're about 1.5 to 2 feet higher than the pad elevation of the building and the drive aisles. So as you look at this particular site plan, when you go into these dual queuing lanes, there's going to be a 4-foot-high screen wall along the northerly edge of that set of queuing lanes. As that wall goes toward the west and turns the corner, because the landscape out at the street is coming up and the drive aisle lanes are below, that 4-foot wall starts to diminish in height as you see it from the public street. But it remains 4 feet high to screen those cars that are queuing. At the adjacent Del Taco, it's built up like it's a bit of a strange berm that's built up there to try to achieve that same screening. This one is going to have a bit more of a natural topography to it that's not going to look quite so forced in terms of the screening. But the screening will be comprised of both land and screen wall.
For Commissioner Murphy, for your information, the site plan is ours. So that doesn't go to the architectural review. And so if we were to say we approve this site plan, this is the site plan that it will have, and they will work on details. So that just in terms of where our purview starts and stops, and there always are recommendations that can be forwarded and concerns, both on landscape and building. Yes, Commissioner.
Am I correct in the Carl's Jr. that is across the street has a similar drive-through structure because it's lower than the Palm Canyon, so it creates this artificial berm you can't even see the street traffic when you're going through the drive-through at the Carl's Jr.
Yeah, on the adjacent parcel just east of this one where the Del Taco is, their drive-through does run along the Racket Club Road side, and it's actually bermed up pretty significantly in order to get the screening. The topography doesn't work as well for that one as it does for this site. They've really had to artificially pile up the soil to give it a screening.
Are there other questions for staff? If there aren't, I'm going to open the public hearing. The applicant has 10 minutes. And then if there are members of the public who wish to speak, they will have 3 minutes, and then the applicant will have 3 minutes for rebuttal.
Chair, Madam Chair, and Commissioners.
Can you go
do I need
closer
to-
to the microphone? Thank you.
Yes, sorry. Good evening, Good evening, Chair, Madam, and Commissioners. My name is Rachel Novak. I'm with the Cadence Group, the applicant for the proposed project here, and the future property owner for the current vacant parcel located at the southwest corner of Palm Canyon and Racket Club Road. I would like to take this moment to thank staff, specifically Ken. He's been a huge assistance with this project and his expert knowledge in guiding this project through the planning process and preparing our development for what we hope to be a successful outcome this evening. So we did prepare a little presentation here. So again, hopefully I'm okay. We are excited to share our plan for the new drive-through at the corner of Palm Canyon and Racket Club. As Ken had noted, our request before you this evening includes the approval of a development permit for our new retail development, a commercial use permit for the proposed drive-through, and a variance for a necessary reduction of minimum building square footage due to the unique shape and size of the parcel we are developing. Our site is an out parcel of the old shopping center from the 1980s that was demolished in the early 2000s and then later proposed to be a part of the art colony development that was unable to move forward due to the economic downturn in the early 2000s. The parcel has remained vacant and since it was demolished almost 20 years ago. The parcel we are seeking to redevelop is located at the corner of this old shopping center and is just under half an acre. Due to its size, and small triangular shape, the area to develop a rectangular coffee shop is limited and restricts our ability to meet the minimum 2,000 building square footage required by code, requiring the variance requested this evening. Excuse me. This slide here is just giving you a perspective of the different visual points. So the first image you're looking at is south from Palm Canyon at the site. The second image is looking east from Racquet Club to the site to the right. The third is looking west from Racquet Club with a site to the left. And the fourth and final image is looking north from Palm Canyon to the project on the left. I'm sorry, on the right. Adjacent uses, so adjacent to our immediate east is an existing Del Taco, as we've talked about, with a drive-through. To the west and across Palm Canyon is an existing commercial center. To our north and across Racquet Club is an existing neighborhood and commercial center. And then to our south is a vacant commercial property currently being marketed for sale. So here you'll see our proposed site plan. We're proposing to redevelop this triangular parcel with a new coffee shop, drive-through shop. The drive-through will be approximately 1,150 square feet and will be a drive-through only cafe with dual drive-through lane accommodating up to 19 vehicles. The site will contain 7 parking stalls intended for employees. As highlighted on this slide, code requires us to have 7 queuing spaces for the drive-through, and we are providing 19, far exceeding the minimum code requirement. We have provided 7 parking spaces for employees. Typically, we have 3 to 4 per shift. The parking also provides areas for deliveries and our secure trash enclosure that's designed to be harmonious with the architecture of the building. This project will meet and exceed all development standards with the exception of the reduced building square footage requiring the variance this evening. The architecture of the building is well articulated with a balance of both vertical and horizontal elements, complementary colors, a rich palette of textures, and surface articulation. Due to the topography of the site slopes downward from the west to the east approximately 5 feet. This topography allows for the drive-through lane to be slightly recessed from view. A screen wall has been included around the perimeter of the drive-through lane that ensures we maintain the minimum 4-foot screening requirement from the right-of-way. The screen wall is being designed to complement the building material to seamlessly integrate into the site. Landscape has strategically been placed to shade pedestrian paths and to cast shadow and shade on customer vehicles, order point, and pickup points. We have used a selection of water-efficient landscaping materials with annual color plantings in areas of high visual impact. The corner will be treated with enhanced landscape to create a welcoming entry to the future development. The proposed project will be accessed from 2 existing curb cuts that are shared with the adjacent properties. The first existing curb cut is a full turning movement from Palm Canyon, just south of the property. The second existing curb cut is a full turning movement located east of the adjacent Del Taco. There will be no new curb cuts proposed as part of this project. The on-site circulation will be accommodated via shared driveways as noted in yellow on this slide. Access to and from the existing curb cuts and driveways are granted via an up-to-date access easement and agreements in place between our parcel and the adjacent parcels. And I think, Chairperson, I think you had a question on the parking, so just to clarify, there is no shared parking agreement currently in place for the CC&Rs. So that is it for my presentation. I'm up for any questions that you may have.
We're not at questions yet. For the planning director, Hadwin, are there any members of the public who wish to speak?
There are 2 members or a couple members of the public in the Zoom waiting room. If anyone would like to speak on this item, please raise your hand. I'm seeing nobody. If you're not able to raise your hand and you would like to speak, just unmute yourself. I'm not seeing anyone wishing to speak, Madam Chair.
Thank you. At this point, you have 5 minutes for rebuttal. There having been no comments, I'm assuming you won't wish to use that, but this is an appropriate time for members of the commission to ask questions so that we keep them in the public record. Commissioner Miller has his hand up.
Yes, hi. Have you looked at, I'm going to ask a question about the shade in a moment, but have you looked at reorienting the building such that it was alongside of the building up against Racket Club with the exiting essentially where your, queuing lanes are coming in? You can put the building up against Racket Club, essentially where your first, say, 6 queuing spaces are. They're coming off of the internal driveway, and it would probably reduce the number of queuing that you would have, but you would get a building at least up toward the street on Racket Club. And I understand the need to get the window, the pickup window on the left side of the vehicle. So that would allow you to swing your queuing lanes around to get their goodies at the pickup window. The advantage, it would put a building frontage up against the street more so than it is now, parallel with the Racket Club. Although as I'm sort of designing this out during the meeting, there are some negatives to that too. It will significantly reduce your queuing, probably down to 10 or 12 spaces, and it would probably make the queuing that is able to be accommodated more visible from the street, especially along Palm Canyon. So that may not be a good thing, but I know that was an issue that was recently raised by the commissioners in terms of how the building is oriented on the site. And so has the applicant looked at, I'm sure you had different renditions of where the building was going to go. And so did you understand why I was sort of positioning the building, and why did you reject that?
When we look at sites, we do a numerous number of site planning for it, and it all comes down to what's going to work best for what are constraints for zoning, but also what works best for the operation of the tenant. So for this one, it had to do with the drive-through lane and creating that extra queuing that's there and needing that extra space. By reducing the queuing, we're reducing our sales and our ability to perform for that site. So keeping that at that 19-car queue is really helpful for the business itself.
Okay, and then my other question is regarding the shade structure, especially I think to the pickup window. Those vehicles are all going to be getting the south sun most of the year. I, for one, wonder why you wouldn't want to put an overhang, with columns on the right side of the vehicle, such that there was a true viable shade structure, not dependent on a tree trimmer hacking the tree and the tree's growth, for shade, where you've got a defined and 100% shade from day one, especially on that south-facing pickup window. Even I think your employees inside the window would appreciate that amount of shade. So that's really important for me. And so had you considered that as part of the design too? Because I know there's other drive-throughs around, including Starbucks, that have an overhang going across the drive aisle.
So we do currently have a 6-foot overhang on the drive-through window. That's typical of most Starbucks that you see. And then with the order box, it's possible for Starbucks to order one that includes a shade canopy over the order point itself. We've talked with Ken in regards to this and gone back and forth a little bit, and that's why we did add some additional trees that you could see from the landscape plan. It's not something we're opposed to doing, so if it's a condition that needs to be met, we're happy to do that and look at it further.
Okay, I appreciate that. My biggest concern is with the pickup window, because I think that's where the vehicle is probably going to be stopped the longest ultimately, and it is facing directly south. Okay.
Commissioner Baker?
Hi, Rachel, is it?
Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
First of all, a beautiful trash structure. It looks secure. No, we get a lot of problems where I work with people coming in after hours and trying to pick through your trash. So that looks very
I think
secure.
it's something we've done over the years is make sure like the screening and all of that.
Yeah, it looks nice and it's secure, and so does the corner landscaping. My only concern is the pedestrian access. What was the rationale to get rid of the walk-up window?
So there was concern originally. I know Ken had mentioned we were showing it, but we've recently had the store that's down the street had to shut down their walk-up ability because of security issues. It's a security issue for the employees, and the city, I guess there wasn't enough city staff to help negate that with that site, and so that's where we came back and changed the plan for that. It was more of a security for our patrons and our employees.
Thank you.
Do you have more questions?
No.
Are there other questions from? That was my major question. So it was a security for staffing issue?
Yeah. I don't know specifically for the other site what was going on. From what I understand, though, that's the reason that they shut down that walk-up window at the previous site.
We're referring to the corner of, is it Mesquite? Not Mesquite, what is that?
Sunny Dunes.
Sunny Dunes, yeah, Sunny Dunes and Palm Canyon? Yeah. Okay.
I mean, that is another thing we could look at again. Why we took it out originally was because of that safety issue for our
Yeah, I hear you.
partners.
Yeah.
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Rotman?
sorry.
Go ahead.
The other issue that was a constraint that they decided to remove the walk-up window is that it would have necessitated additional parking. And there really was no other place in the site for the provision of additional parking.
And would we have had discretion on that?
To require less parking?
Yes,
Yes, you could.
thank you. Commissioner Rotman?
Yeah, so I'm looking at the, I have a couple of things. I'm looking at the circulation plan, and I've experienced Starbucks drive-through before. And, how are you going to direct people coming in off of Racket Club? How are you going to direct them so that they're not cutting through the Del Taco parking lot? And have you talked to Del Taco about the potential impact of the, I'm imagining that Starbucks will have a much greater demand of people going to it than Del Taco. And the potential impact on Del Taco's business could be dramatic. Because your patrons are going to come in, they're going to cut through the middle of Del Taco, and even though you have 19 spaces queuing, they're still potentially going to back up into that parking lot. So how do you go about mitigating that?
So you said you've seen it at other Starbucks before. We have mitigating measures that we implement at sites as we see necessary. So it could be coning, it could be signage. It just depends on the area and looking at that. We haven't fully explored signage here at this site and gotten all of the approvals on that. But it would be something that we would look at if we needed to add some additional. We've had preliminary conversations with Del Taco, obviously being a neighbor for them and there's new business and development coming in. That hasn't been a question that we've discussed or been a concern for them as of yet. But all these are things we could address as they come up for concerns for signage, striping, additional directionals.
Okay. And then the other question is, I don't know if you've been in town like on a Coachella weekend or any of the big event weekends, and people trying to leave town are coming down Racket Club or coming down Palm Canyon to leave town. And the traffic backs up for miles. And my concern is that on those special occasions, and they happen quite frequently, that somebody's going to see a Starbucks and say, hey, let's get a Starbucks for to go. And then they're going to come in to the drive-through, and then it's just going to cause a traffic problem from people trying to, because people will be leaving, and everybody will either have to make a left turn into the current driveways, whether they're on Racket Club or on Palm Canyon, and that's going counter to the direction they're going. So I have some concerns about the circulation and how that's all going to play out. Because I don't know if you've ever been here for that, but it is a nightmare.
I have not been here for that. Again, I think there's some steps that we could take with our partners as those things happen when events are in town. Obviously, it's our partners going out. If you've seen it at other places, directing traffic and showing people where to go and like placing chains and cones to keep them from going the direction we don't want them to go. So I think when those events are happening, it's something that we would, as an operations, think ahead of time to mitigate.
Okay. Thank you. That's it for now.
Commissioner Miller?
Yeah, I had one more question that came up. On your diagram, Rachel, that's shown in yellow, I'm assuming that you've sort of worked out where you think sort of on-site directory signage should go or would go. And I'm assuming you're going to have a robust sign plan that are the small little directing signs saying, drive through with an arrow. And so do you have authorization from the shopping center owner to put signage appropriately along that yellow path, so to speak, so that we do avoid, or at least to the extent that we can, avoid any potential backup in the actual, Del Taco, primary lot there. If the patrons do follow the yellow lines, then I think there's less concern that I would have in circulation.
We haven't done signage as of yet. Starbucks has a branding book with the typical, the directional signage, exit, enter, all of that, but that's not something that's been reviewed or discussed at this point, and I defer to Ken in your discussions with Katie if that's been something we've talked about, but I don't think we're at that point for the signage.
There's a couple of issues with respect to signage. The sign ordinance requires that the signage for a building be on the same parcel that the business is. So in this case, while it makes complete sense to have signage somewhere near that racket club curb cut, that's on an adjacent parcel. And there isn't a mechanism in the zoning, in the signage ordinance, to allow a business to have its signage on someone else's parcel. The other signage issue that Rachel's speaking about is the current monument sign on this particular parcel, the subject parcel, is a sign for Del Taco. And again, the ordinance doesn't accommodate signage for a business that's not on that parcel. So the applicant does have a sign district application submitted, which we've not started processing until we knew where this project was going to go. I don't have an answer for you with respect to how we make signage work on an adjacent parcel. It takes more deliberation and analysis through the sign ordinance to figure out if there's a way of doing that. I don't have an answer for you other than that, but that's a challenge that we have on this particular project.
There are provisions for multi-tenanted buildings that we may look to. This is a bit different than that. We've certainly done it elsewhere in the city. So I think it's something we would have to look at very seriously.
We're still in questions of the applicant and not staff. Commissioner Baker.
I withdraw my question.
Any other additional questions for the applicant? Thank you very much. The
Thank you
matter
for
is
your time.
before the commission. We've got a couple of issues to look at here. We've got the site plan, which is in the development permit, taking a look at that. We have separately the issue of the permit, whether or not we're going to approve the drive-in, and we also have the variance for the building. So let's go first to the site plan and talk about the project and the site plan, and maybe starting with Commissioner Rotman and then going down the line.
Yeah, well, I think in my questions to the applicant, I think I expressed my concerns about the circulation and how that's actually going to work on a day-to-day basis. And I also, I'll commend staff and the applicant on enhancing the site. I know it's a difficult site, enhancing the site with the landscaping. I really appreciate that. But I think also, my concern is that if this project gets approved, it sets a precedent for what's developed on the east side of Palm Canyon. And this is a project that looks very much like a suburban, everyday suburban project. And I think this is really the gateway to the city. And I think not having a pedestrian access, having maybe an outdoor dining area, really limits any future development for the shopping center, as well as what's developed further on Palm Canyon. So, yeah.
Commissioner Murphy?
I have a little different perspective in that I think I agree that the site is challenging to develop. I'm satisfied personally with everything about the site plan, with the exception of the issue of shading and whether it's a shade structure in addition to trees. So however we move forward, that would be the one caveat I have. But I think it's a challenging corner. I'm of the mind that having even though it's a drive-through without pedestrian access or a walk-up takeout capability, I think it is going to breathe some life into that corner and potentially motivate others to develop the rest of that abandoned site. So I think it's commendable.
My understanding is this is basically going to be just a grab and go for people either going out of town in the morning or coming into town for a fun weekend or something. It doesn't really seem to be addressing the local neighborhood use of that, considering there are 2 Starbucks less than a mile away in the Albertsons shopping center, and both seem to be completely busy no matter what time of day or night you go there. My only concern is, again, the pedestrian access, of which there is none. In a perfect world, we would at least have a walk-up window where people riding bikes, walking their dog could stop, get a cup of coffee, sit down, have a little muffin or something, go on about their day. But I understand security. Unfortunately, that's the world in which we live. So apart from that, and echoing probably a little more shade than that just 6-foot hangover. Also, for your signage, ordering menus, you're going to be, when you're coming in that dual lane, you're facing right into the sun. So you're going to have to figure out whatever signage you have is going to, your customers are going to be blinded trying to read. Oh, most people go to Starbucks know what they want without even looking at the menu. But that is an issue just because the sun sets right there, especially in the summer. It's coming from the northwest. But apart from that, it's a beautiful plan.
Commissioner Miller?
Yeah, I think we've got to take a look at this as a out parcel, essentially, of a very suburban shopping center, albeit a long demolished shopping center. I don't think this site has ever been developed. And so I'm welcoming a development here too, and think that it could be a catalyst for further redevelopment of the shopping center. We have a suburban shopping center across the street. We have this suburban shopping center. Ideally, in a perfect world, we would love to see buildings up at the street and a more pedestrian environment. But the fact is, this is a vehicular part of the city, coming and going. And I think this could be a benefit to development. I think we need to work on the shade structure coming off the building especially. But my main comment is that this, site, which is less than half an acre, is not going to change the direction of the suburban character of this intersection of Racket Club and Palm Canyon as much as I would like it to. I don't think we can expect that from this 0.48 acre site. And I think the best we can do is work on getting a development that looks as good as it can with the robust landscaping that staff has worked on, the shade structure, and a robust signage plan for the future to try to make it function as well as it can. Those are my comments.
I have a real problem with the site plan. I think, in terms of where the building is placed, I liked the alternate with at least putting the building up against the street. I do agree with Commissioner Rotman that it's a very suburban project, and with no pedestrian dining, with no, I can't see supporting a project like this with no pedestrian walk-up dining. I think that at a minimum has to be changed. And I talked to both projects across the street. I talked to the Del Taco, and I went across to the 7-Eleven, asked them if they had problems with homeless. They said minor problems. They tell people to go away, but they serve people, and people come in all day. And I don't think that we should agree to a project that has absolutely no pedestrian access or dining. I think I would send, if it was up to me, and I'm beginning to count noses and it isn't, I would send this back to the applicant to go forward. I also have a problem with adding to the queue and the idling cars to have 19 spaces there. We wanted to have affordable housing in the back. In the back of this larger project, we had a study session with a group several months ago. The idea of adding to automobile pollution and impacting what could be a really lovely housing project behind it is a concern to me. So we've taken Starbucks projects before and sent them to AAC with us to a joint group to work on the site plan with the applicant. That's what I'd like to see us do. I'm glad that staff added landscape. I don't really think it creates the kind of urban edge we want. I think duplicating what is a very outdated suburban shopping mall across the street and reduplicating it shouldn't be our goal. So, from the point of good urbanism, I don't think this fits, but I also think giving in to absolutely no pedestrian service is a disservice to the community from this commission. So,
Can I just add to that?
Yep.
So I don't live far from here, and the number of bicyclists, hikers, walkers that go up the hill and come down the hill, I mean, a coffee shop right there would service bicyclists, pedestrians, as equally as well as automobile. So I think it's a real misstep to eliminate that from this project.
and I don't think that requires turning this down. I think this requires setting up a subcommittee with at least a member of the Architectural Review Committee and working with the applicant to see if we can't get to where we need to be. And I don't know if any of the three of you has a change in that. I don't think I'm hearing that from any of you.
Well, I would make an additional comment based on the discussion that's ensuing. I certainly wouldn't object to on-site service, walk-up service, certainly. But as you know, and I'll acknowledge now, we did receive 2 letters of disappointment about this application from, regarding a business across the street in the suburban shopping center across the street that does not have drive-through service, but that serves the local community coffee and delectables in the morning and during the day. And we heard about their dismay at this location. One thing I would say is, if this was vehicular only as proposed, that would serve a different niche than what they can provide in their walk-up service at their location across the street. So in that regard, this is kind of a benefit to them not having a walk-up service. Again, I don't have any objection to walk-up service here, but just looking at what comments we've received from the public, that may factor into my decision on this ultimately.
So,
Want me to make a motion and see where it goes? Don't know if it's going to go anywhere. Okay, I would move to approve the application by Cadence Group for a development permit, a variance, and a conditional use permit for the drive-through coffee shop at 2466 North Palm Canyon Drive, subject to the staff conditions and the findings in the staff report, as well as additional condition regarding the application of a shade structure attached to the building and extending from the building for the pickup window on the south side of the building. And then what else was there? Was there anything else from you, David or Carl? And then with the requisite landscape shown on the landscape plan, which is very important, I think, to pass on to the ARC, I would make that motion.
Second.
as a friendly amendment, even though I'm going to vote against this, I would like to see the trees at least every 15 foot on center. They don't have them at the edges where people are turning the corner. Is that friendly?
I would accept that a friendly amendment, subject to the requirement for safe sight triangle issues if they come into play at the very intersection. And the
So we have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion?
I'm sorry, just for the record, can I get that last condition again about the trees?
It would be trees going around the corner at least 15 foot on center, shade trees.
Okay.
And trees that are healthy in the valley. We're beginning to lose several of our tree species.
Did we state what size trees to be installed?
36-inch box, if that's possible.
And I think you mean along the frontages of Palm Canyon
Frontages,
and
yeah.
Racket Club, right?
Yeah.
Again, respecting the safe site triangle at the very corner.
Right.
Thank you.
Would you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Baker,
Yes.
Commissioner Miller,
Yes.
Commissioner Murphy,
Yes.
Commissioner Rotman,
No.
and Chair Wormick.
No.
The motion carries 3-2 with one absence.
Okay, the next item we have is the CUP for the drive-in. We've approved the site plan.
I think that
It-
was all
it's-
in the motion.
It includes everything.
Yeah.
My motion was intended to, and I think I stated
You
all
just-
three
you-
items.
We were starting only with the first, so we still have, we haven't discussed the variance on the size of the building.
The motion that was just approved all 3 applications.
I did not understand that. I had separated the discussions.
And I apologize about that. I assumed that all the discussion was sort of wrapping up into the one package.
So we're done.
We're done.
Congratulations. And we would reduce the parking. Moving right along, this item is concluded. We have no unfinished business. There is no new business. Planning Commission reports, requests, and comments. I have a couple. We were supposed to get to design guidelines for Palm Springs last year, and we were also supposed to have, work on the zoning code this year.
Yes, so that was on my list. Thank you, Madam Chair. The design guidelines were to be done in tandem with the zone code update, and of course, we're quite delayed because we're quite delayed on the general plan, as you all know. That said, good news in that the RFP for the zoning code comprehensive update is being released tomorrow. It will effectively be live, as I understand it, on Planet Bids, which is the system that the city uses to disseminate our RFPs on Monday, by Monday. If any of you know good planning firms who do zoning code work, I will circulate the link. You can certainly circulate that to your contacts. But Madam Chair, we anticipate that we would go through a pretty quick process of interviewing and going through that selection process to return to the City Council ideally in January to make a selection of a consultant to undertake that work. Once that is in place, we would then be able to, in tandem, and this is something that Ken will be helping to lead, coordinate the design guideline process as well. But we didn't want those to be bifurcated and one to get too far ahead of the other because obviously they'll be interrelated.
I think partially that question comes from my concern that we don't have urban design standards that we can lean on when these kinds of questions come to staff. And I think we would get better product if we had and applicant submissions if we had some of those standards in place.
Absolutely, I agree. I think not just for us as staff, you as commission, but also for applicants, clarity on sort of what the city is looking for, right? I think is really going to be beneficial. It's a priority.
And where are we with the general plan?
Well, as I mentioned to you, we got additional comments from the state the day after City Council adopted the housing element, so we're working through those. We have some questions into HCD, to our contact there, in terms of what we need to do to address the additional comments that we received. We will get something in to be certified just as quickly as we can, but as I know you know, it's slow going in terms of working with them and negotiating with them, and they're working across the state. You know, we will acknowledge that, but it is a frustrating process. I can't sugarcoat that any other way, and we are doing our best to get that done. The other three items, so the land use element, the circulation element, and the safety element, are all sort of in the final stages of being tinkered with by the consultant. There will need to be another meeting of the advisory committee, which we're hoping will happen by the end of the year. So David Newell is working on that, which would then allow us to sort of proceed with adoption of those elements early next year. That is the goal. We couldn't wait any longer on the zoning code. In an ideal world, that would all be wrapped up and we would wait and then start the zoning code. I think we know enough about what that outcome will be that we can start the zoning code. We can't wait any longer, and that's why we're proceeding at this time. But I would like everything wrapped up as early next year as we can.
And just from Commissioner Baker's comments earlier today, it would be important if some of the concerns of the Sustainability Commission got wrapped into our zoning code and our design guidelines.
Yeah, I didn't want to comment earlier because, to be honest, I don't know what progress we've made in sort of moving the bar on those kinds of issues, but I absolutely agree that it's important, and I think, you know, I'll flag it for the consultant and for David, who are looking at that, and certainly when we come back to the advisory committee, I think that that will be a really good conversation to have to make sure that, you know, our thinking hasn't shifted in the 2 or 3 years that we've been working on that. Yes.
Is there any more to your report? Have any of our items gone through City Council, or have they taken actions we should know about?
We have not had much before City Council that the Planning Commission has acted on recently. There was a bit of a delay in getting the annual zoning code update that you all saw some time ago through second reading. So I believe that will be going, what week are we in? In the next council cycle, the first meeting in November. to get that adopted. As you know, council adopted it with no changes to what you all had recommended. So we just have to get that through second reading so that it becomes adopted. Otherwise, nothing is tracking at this point. They've seen the housing element. There's a few historic site preservation items that will be going before council that didn't come before you all, but those are historic designations, good news stories that we expect to see at the next council meeting. So nothing in terms of tracking on the city council agenda. You will have heard, or you may have heard, that the mayor made remarks at the last city council meeting as part of ongoing conversations around College of the Desert and as part of ongoing conversations around reparations. The mayor and a majority of the council in their discussion at the end of the last council meeting did give staff direction to re-engage in looking at the College Park specific plan. So a little bit of background on that. You know, it was done a number of years ago when we anticipated that the College of the Desert was going to go on the North Palm Springs site on Indian Canyon. Of course, that conversation has evolved and they are now looking at a different site over here. And then there's, you know, been some legal stuff going on in the background that I'm not entirely privy to, but long story short, we're looking for a path out of all of that that would see, you know, that site potentially developed for uses that are more supportive of that community, both because College of the Desert won't be there and we want to see economic development and other opportunities and certainly housing in that area, but also in recognition of some of the ongoing reparations discussions. So that is something we've been tasked with looking into. I do know that a number of years ago, we had, a few years ago, we had looked at engaging a consultant on that process. So we're looking to go back to that RFP, that quote, and dusting that off and expanding the scope to look at some of the issues that have come up over the last few years. So we'll be looking at that
I
soon.
know when that came to us in the housing element, and for people here, there's a significant acreage there that the city is in negotiations to purchase from the college, which was purposely not zoned because of the negotiations with the college. But there was a very large preference to figure out how some of that or most of that land could be used for more affordable housing, apartments, not strictly the higher price single family housing that the development community chooses to build, and to look at the zoning particularly, so that hopefully at some point that comes back.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And I think that the scope, I think the last time it was discussed, it was exactly what you were mentioning, looking certainly for more opportunities for affordable housing. I think the direction that council gave was just a slight expansion of that scope to also look at other economic development and job creation opportunities in tandem with that, and looking at, you know, other things that are needed in that neighborhood, including fresh food options. So those are the kinds of things we'll be looking at through the process. That's it for council direction. The other thing that I would say is I know we've mentioned this a few times now, but we are very actively looking at our ARC, our Architectural Review Committee appointments. So we have, at this point, 7 applications. We'll be starting to review those next week. And then ideally moving forward with appointments. We have a number of people terming out or termed out who have agreed to stay longer. And so we need to get that resolved very quickly. Related to that, we had, I believe in the summer, at our last meeting before summer break, looked at creating ARC liaisons where each of you would take a turn sitting in on the ARC. In some ways that fell apart, and I can say this because she's not here to defend herself, because our vice chair took a leave of absence and she was the first up on the roster to do that. So we haven't done it. I think a couple of items have come before the ARC recently where, you know, even they were saying it would really benefit from having you all there to sort of provide that feedback. 12 at Las Palmas, if those of you who were on the commission at the time recall that application, there was a lot of discussion around that and the architectural details. It returned to ARC at their last meeting. They did approve it, but I think there were certainly conversations about how it would have been useful to have one of you there to sort of talk through that process. So I am going to re-up that. I will I'll look at the list, recirculate it, and we'll start to get that going for our November meetings.
And we've had that for years and stopped it probably for a year as we instituted some of the changes and responsibilities of the two groups. But it is useful and necessary to continue that. And it's also good for commissioners here to see what the ARC does with projects that we've looked at. They do have a number of areas which are no longer in our jurisdiction, like the sign code and some of the hillside properties, which we used to have and we decided were more appropriately going to only one body to review. So it's interesting. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I take full responsibility for missing the 12 at Los Palmas. That was my duty, and I just lost track of it on my calendar. I looked at the agenda the next day, and I said, I missed that meeting, and I would have gone. I got thrown off, I think, a little bit, if I'm going to make an excuse, by the fact that the October 2nd ARC was not a meeting because I didn't have an item, I guess. And then I just totally missed track of October 16th. So I do take responsibility for missing that. If you had given me a call, I would.
I think what
Thank you, Commissioner Miller.
I think what would be
However-
useful, to be honest, is not just to get a paper list, but to get
Correct.
appointments that go on our calendars that we accept, and then when we look at our calendars, we know that we have an obligation that evening.
Yes, agreed. And I was going to add that, Commissioner Miller, thank you for that. However, I think we can do a better job at making sure that it's on your calendars.
I have one more question. We have an old PD on, tonight we had an example of a project with a PD that's no longer useful. And how does staff go about removing or changing some of those old entitlements that have stayed on the books but no longer function?
Ken seems to have experience in this regard, so he'd like to answer.
We have a lot of PDs that are in the similar condition as this one. The advantage that those things are still laying around is that a PD amendment can be made to bring that project into some kind of current viable use. And that's the best way to have some of these old PDs not necessarily go away, but to be adapted to whatever new economic use or housing use is appropriate. So I think the fact that you've got these old PDs, yes, it's a potential liability, it's also an asset because a PD gives an applicant some flexibility that might not be otherwise available through the underlying zone.
What I would add to that is I think there are certainly instances where that's the case, and then there are other instances where it just may not at all make sense anymore. And so I think the comprehensive zoning update is also an opportunity for us to do an inventory and start to make some of those determinations.
Any other questions of staff? There being none, we are adjourned until November 8th, 2023. Thank you all, at 5:30. And thank you all for a healthy and great discussion tonight.